Hello there. What is going on, everyone? We are talking about Star Trek Into the Unknown today. We've got a brand new FAQ version 1.0, and this is a long awaited FAQ. It's going to clarify some things. We're going to talk about some of those. We're going to go over it really quick, and I'll give you a link to where you can check it out, as well as all of the other Star Trek Into the Unknown documentation. This is a big deal because, again, this was one of those things that has been worked on for a while. I know Max and Mike have been talking about all of the work that they've been doing on this, as well as getting everything else out there. And this kind of being released is one step closer to rising tensions finally coming out as well. You kind of needed to get the base game FAQ solidified, and then right before we throw all new rules questions into the mix with rising tensions. So this is exciting. We're going to go over it. Hopefully this answers some questions. I know a lot of people have looked over Star Trek Into the Unknown and talked about how heavy the rules can be. I have done some videos on how to play. I've gone over some of the basics like movement and also like combat, but there's a lot more. There's like launching shuttles. There's there's forming teams and doing missions and all of that stuff. And it's been coming together, and I've been slow to do it because I've had some questions as well. This helps that, and maybe we'll get back and making more Star Trek Into the Unknown content, more rules videos, and more explanations. It's a touchy subject to get on because there's so many different variables and so many different situations that can influence a lot of these things. So with all that being said, I want to remind you guys we are still doing a round of the giveaway for a $25 Amazon gift card. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. And let's go ahead and dive right into the FAQ, which we have pulled up. Let me know down in the comments if you guys have played Star Trek Into the Unknown yet. Are you guys looking at it? I know I did an unboxing earlier this week, and I was talking a little bit about the Red Enterprise and then Rising Tensions becoming available soon. I know some people have been very eager for a lot of this stuff. So it's exciting to see new stuff coming out of WizKids for Star Trek Into the Unknown, especially this particular version 1.0. So there's a lot. They're broken down really well. This is a very well done FAQ because it's broken down by section, by things that like this is. I've had some criticisms about the rule book and that sometimes it was difficult to follow. I feel like this FAQ is very easy to follow, and this is written very, very well. So, to the team, excellent job on this. I want to give like 2 thumbs up for this. But there's just at a glance, there's different sections. The first section is abilities. This is a chunky section because there's a lot of things that reference abilities. But there's procedure FAQs, keyword FAQs, ship and auxiliary unit FAQs, FAQs for damage. So all of the different sections of the game that your question might pertain to. And the cool thing is there are some times where a question will basically one situation will be in 2 different categories, like damage and an ability. And you want to know what? The FAQ question and answer will appear in both sections. So if you're looking, that's just well done. Well done. I love that the same question is actually answered multiple times in here because it gives extra clarification and also puts it into more places. And one of those we'll talk about it when it comes into launching torpedoes and shuttles. We're going to talk about that. So, a lot of these are basic ones, like is somebody at range of itself, is somebody friendly to themselves. These are kind of standard things that I think apply to a lot of games that we're familiar with, but it's good to have that clarification. Some clarifications about Ben Sisko. I have been playing a lot of Dominion when I've been playing, so I haven't really, I don't think I've been able to play Federation outside of that very first game. I haven't really gotten much exposure into Federation stuff. So I've played against some Federation people. I actually played a lot of mirror matches, Dominion versus Dominion lately too, which is, it is wild, let me tell you. So here, there's some interesting things about an officer that's attached to a team. A lot of that, and this is really interesting. So it said, like this question here is, can an officer that's attached to a team give a priority order at a station at that team's location? which is really, and the answer is no. The officer must be assigned to a station, given to give the priority order there. An officer attached to a team can't be assigned to a station in another unit. This is one of those questions that this is answered in multiple places because this is actually answering two different questions. Can the officer now? There's also a terminology thing. A location. In this case, like let's say the bridge. On most ships, the station there's only one station in most locations. Outside of the bridge is both a location and the bridge is also a location that has like three or four different stations on it, with being like the captain's chair, helm, ops or instruments rather, and tactical, right? So those are stations. And so this is good clarification for me because I had, for whatever reason, I had been like having somebody, form a security team, and then taking one of my best tactical officers, having him lead the security team, which is great. But then kind of parking him back on the bridge in the tactical section with the whole team, kind of like my thought is like, yeah, he's a tactical, and everybody else is just standing around like observing, like, yeah, we got your back, and like it doesn't work that way. If I want to put my best tactical officer on a team, I'm kind of taking him out of the tactical station for bridge, so he can't do tactical and then lead a security team. So this is good clarification, and it really it makes you make a really tough choice on if I want an officer to actually lead a team or not, because it used to be, of course, I would want an officer to lead a team, and now I'm not so sure because I'm basically taking that officer away from everything else. And maybe that was clear before, but I didn't see that clarity before. So this is a good clarification, I think, and it answers a lot of those questions. So that's a good one. Some locations about what is considered here. There's a couple of interesting things here. It's talking about the Commodore giving priority orders to their own ships. That makes a lot of sense. Let's see. There's a couple in here that I thought were particularly interesting. One of the things is a Commodore can't give a. So if you're new to the game, a Commodore is going to be your fleet commander, right? Your highest ranking person, and on your flagship, they have, if they're in the captain's chair, they can, basically micromanage and give one order to anywhere, but they can't do it to a place where there's already a committed officer. So you can't like double tap, the exact same station, which is a thing. Although I believe you can. If you have somebody at helm but they're not committed yet, I think you can be like, okay, Picard is going to be like, hey, we're going to do a helm maneuver, and you exhaust Picard, and then you later exhaust your helm officer, and so I think you can do it the same one twice by doing it that way, but you can't do it the other way around. But again, and I've perused this. I haven't read it in excruciating detail, so some of these things are stuff that I've looked over, but again, I'm going to have to reread this document multiple times. But let's see. There's an interesting one here that this was something that came out of my experience playing with the developers, but I didn't see it clarified anywhere. And so when we were playing like a tournament recently, there became the question of if I'm taking a test and I've got reroll instrument power, and let's say that's 2. Other games like Armada, you would have to, or X-Wing, whatever, you'd have to say, all right, which 2 dice do you want to reroll? And you pick them, and then you reroll those dice. End of story. But it was explained to me that you can reroll the same die multiple times. And as a matter of fact, you could be like, all right, there's 2. I'm just going to reroll this one. Boom. Oh, I didn't like that. Let me reroll it again. And that's my 2 rerolls. So rerolls, you can do them kind of however you want. You're not restricted to only, like, if this was Star Wars Armada and you could reroll 2 dice, but you only had 1 you wanted to reroll, then you'd just throw away the extra reroll, right? So you'd have to decide all at once. But in this case, it says when an effect allows a player to reroll dice, can a single die be rerolled more than 1 time from that effect? The answer is yes. If an effect allows for multiple rerolls, 1 or more dice can be rerolled. A single die can be rerolled up to the number of times sequentially during the specific modify dice step equal to the number of rerolls allowed by that effect. For example, and I give examples here. Again, this is a really good FAQ because of the way it is structured and the way it is written, I am very impressed with this FAQ. The fact that they're giving examples is really, really nice. Consider you have a difficulty 3 test with a result of a success, a critical success, and whatever the other one is. I forget the name of that icon off the top of my head. And then a blank. And then an effect lets the player reroll 2 dice. They could choose to apply the first reroll to the die with the blank result. If that die comes up blank again, they could choose to apply the second reroll granted by that effect to that die again. Notice they're talking about the same effect. It is possible to have multiple effects that grant dice rolls. For example, if you have a reroll of 2 for instruments power, and then you also have advantage tokens. Those are separate effects. This is talking about from even a single effect you can do this. So this gives you a ton of flexibility in rerolls and makes rerolls even more powerful than you may have thought them to be. This is one of those rules that I personally had played by, but when playing in tournaments, when I couldn't back up my claims that the rerolls worked this way, we've had to play them kind of by like Armada or common rules for other games. So this is a really cool mechanic that not a lot of games have. I think this is a big one, so definitely check this one out. This one is on at the bottom of page 2 in the FAQ. So read it for yourself. Really good document there. Really good entry. There is some stuff about transporting. You don't have to beam through your own shields. You're only beaming through the enemy shields. This one, at the top of page 3, this one is also really important. When a unit launches an auxiliary unit, can the launched unit be placed in a different area of the sector than the launching unit is in? This has come up in my games. I was one of the people that asked this question, and hopefully I have helped get this one in there because this happens a lot in a lot of games. The idea, here's the situation. Start of the game, I'm trying to get into section 1, right? Sector 1, or not sector 1, but area 1. And I warp in, and maybe I only warp in to where, like, here's the boundary, and my ship warps in like this, right? So just the front of my ship is in there. And it counts as being in the system, right? So I'm in system number 1. And the butt of my ship is still in deep space, although the whole ship is still considered to be in system 1. What happens if I want to launch a shuttle? Shuttles kind of launch out of the rear, right? So that shuttle is not in system 1, right? But if my ship is in system 1, how is the shuttle not in system 1? So, like, how should we resolve that? I've done stuff where you put it as close as you could in the system again, and it was always stuff like, well, we don't know how this actually works. It might be that you just can't launch a shuttle. It might mean that the shuttle goes as close in system as it can. It may be that you can launch it as normal, but it must move, closer into the system, so it's still technically considered inside the system. And the answer is not what I expected at all. It says the answer is if the unit, the answer here is yes, it can be placed in a different area. For example, if the launching unit is in a system, but the launched unit, in this case a shuttlecraft, can be placed beyond the system boundary in deep space. And that doesn't just mean that it's placed in deep space, but it's still in the system. No, it's in deep space. So the answer there is that if you are launching a shuttle and the shuttle cannot fit into the system, that shuttle is now in deep space and would have to either join dock with a ship and then warp into the system, or do its own warp maneuver and get into the system. Now, this has good and bad applications. For example, you could it's bad in some ways because if you wanted that shuttle to kind of fly around and do things, in the system, you wouldn't be able to do that. You'd have to be farther in. And this could also encourage people to actually fly all the way into a system a little bit more often, especially if they want to launch shuttles. The other thing is, if your ship is in danger of being destroyed or whatever, and you wanted to move some people on board a shuttlecraft to kind of save some of your officers, especially in a campaign, you can kind of launch that shuttle into deep space, and by doing it that way, and then all of a sudden, they're an extra step away from everybody else. So that could be useful. Plus, if you wanted them to go scan some deep space anomalies, depending on the mission, you could do that. This also works the other way around, where if your butt is up to the system, and maybe your ship wants to stay in deep space, and you're just going to launch shuttles into the system because your rear is pressed against it, is something else you can do. The same thing is also later described when it applies to torpedoes, although the question is asked very similarly. Torpedoes apparently can also be launched into a system from deep space if your front of your ship is like right up there to where once you launch the torpedo is in the system, which is very interesting. So it's that again. This is bringing up entire new tactics as well. Like you could kind of snipe launch torpedoes from ultra long range, right? Or maybe not even that long range. So there's definitely, if you don't want to like face the counterattack, that's something that maybe some people will consider. I don't know how well it would work in this game because it's not a straight up battle game. If you were going to do that, if you're launching torpedoes from deep space, that means you're probably not in that system accomplishing the mission and earning victory points. So it's one of those things where it might sound good if it was strictly a death match, but if it wasn't a death match, you might have to think twice about doing it. Let's see, what else do we have here? Some stuff about Breach. Here's an interesting one that I have run across a couple of times. It deals with the hazard phase, events triggering, like, hey, there's a massive system here and it's got unstable and all this other stuff, and every hazard phase your ship now has to make a test and you get bonuses for navigation. Well, how is that going to work? So it says, if a unit is forced to make an involuntary test during an action led by an officer, are that officer's ranks and a relevant skill applied to the test. For example, officer leads an action that causes the unit to make a warp maneuver across a treacherous 2 object. So yes, the committed officer leading the action also leads the involuntary test due to that action, such as treacherous X, see priority orders. This one feeds into the bigger question that I had, is that what if it's involuntary and it's during the hazard phase when there is no action that triggered it? And in that case, they specify it later on. You don't have to take my word for it, but you will see in here when we get to it that no officer leads that test. I had been playing it differently. I was under the impression that you could pick an officer to lead that test because it was during the hazard phase, because again, it would have a keyword on it. But no, the only time an officer would actually lead that test, if it's during the hazard phase, or not during the hazard phase, would be if they had led an action that warped them over it and then also triggered that test. So that was something to think about. But that is talked about a little bit later. What happens when an assigned damage card is discarded, gets shuffled back into the deck. So there's a lot of that stuff that is happening. Let's see. Let's keep going down. There's more. Let's see that there's some stuff about the different sections between shuttles and auxiliaries and the saucer sections and the runabouts. There's some erratas in here too. Let's see. Here we go. Here's another version of the same question, but this is for projectile units specifically. When I launch a projectile or shuttle auxiliary unit, can I place it so that is in a different area from the launching unit? Yes. If the turning tool can be placed so that the launched unit is definitively in the other area. Now, this has some actual practical application, not necessarily just like we've talked about for shuttles or for torpedoes, but probes, which are also projectile units. It could be very beneficial to potentially launch a probe into a system from deep space instead of having to fully warp into that system. If you wanted to stay at deep space, launch a probe into the system, you could do that. So that's pretty cool. Probes and escape pods can move less than their full engine power. It's only the torpedoes that have to move the full amount. So there's some pretty cool stuff. Can you warp over a solid object? Yes, because you're not actually warping through the planet or whatever it is. You kind of just, get space as 3D. So you're just kind of going along the path that it happens to be near. Let's see. There's something else. Some other things in here. Oh, there's a really cool one that I brought up in the Star Trek Into the Unknown Discord, that I thought was really cool, and it dealt with projectiles uh, going off. And so once I find it, I'm going to bring it up because I think it's really really cool. Let's see, is this combat? Let me go down a little bit. There's some stuff with objects and orders and actions. Again, I really do love the way that this is written and set up. We've got some stuff about the ready phase, hazard phase. Here's another one. If a unit with an officer attached is forced to make a test during the hazard phase, can an officer lead that test? No. This is not one of the specified times that an officer can lead a test, regardless of whether they are committed or ready. So this is really this is a good one. I had been playing this one incorrectly, so it's good to see that one clarified. So certain things that I was expecting to be in here happened exactly how I'd thought. Other things I was surprised by. That was one. I thought that one was the other way around. I was wrong. I admit that. Of course, you probably didn't know that I was making that stand on that one unless you had played me in a recent game, but that was what I thought it was for sure. There's some stuff about campaign at the end. We've got to go back to there's some stuff about combat. I probably went past it already. We also have some errata down here, which some of the cards should have been slightly different. And one of these was like just some of the spelling. These are flex points, and I think they were called TP. There was some stuff about engineering and when it should have been mechanics. So there's some common errata changes on some of those. So that's good for clarification. Let me find combat because there's a really interesting one. Wait, was it projectiles? Because I like this one. Basically, it deals with you launching a torpedo, and the torpedo is flying, but it's far away. And what happens if we pass turn 3, and now the complication comes out, and it resets all of our status to blue. But I've already got a torpedo flying at you, but I fired it when we were at war, but now we're at peace. What happens? And I love the way that they answered that, because in short, it's going to count. Like if my torpedo hits your ship, and even though we're peaceful now, it's still going to count as a hostile action, which is really cool. But there's some more finesse to it. And I'm probably scrolling right past it. So, here it is. This is to the top of page 4. Is a torpedo's detonation attack an aggressive or hostile act? Now, this doesn't only apply to after the complication is revealed. For example, I'm going to give you another example when this is a really cool situation. But I'll read the whole thing first, and then we'll talk about different examples in which this is applicable. This depends on the unit that the torpedo attacks. If a detonation attack targets at least one opposing ship unit, it is a hostile act. If a detonation attack targets at least one opposing auxiliary unit or projectile unit, but no ships, it's an aggressive act. Aggressive acts, for your recollection, aren't necessarily the same as a hostile act. It usually doesn't flip your directive to wartime, but it can flip one of your directives, kind of allowing you to change the teams that you can create. It's usually a prelude to war, while not necessarily being a declaration of war. If a torpedo is removed because it has no remaining endurance, and not because of its detonation keyword is triggered, it is neither a hostile or aggressive act. That last part I think is obvious because it didn't even detonate really. But yes, so if it targets opposing stuff, it's going to be bad for you. It's going to probably cause you to lose victory points. So when is this relevant? Like I already said, if we're at war, if we're hostile, I'm firing torpedoes at you, and maybe it's from a distance, it goes off, or it doesn't go off yet. Maybe it's too far away. Then of course the complication gets flicked. We go back to peaceful. If it's a complication that sets our directives to peaceful, and then on the following turn the torpedo ends up impacting you, that will still count as a hostile act if it hits your ship. That's fair. I didn't expect that was the case. Although thematically it still makes sense. It's just I guess it means there's some additional risk with firing long-range torpedoes towards the end of round 3, or any round that the complication is expected to flip. But here's another case. Jean-Luc Picard is the other case. Jean-Luc Picard has the ability to respond to a hostile act. He has the ability to just take you from any green status to any yellow status, which, if he's on board the Enterprise or a Galaxy class, can be 5 different alert statuses, which is a massive increase. And it puts the Enterprise, especially if you jump to like yellow 2 or yellow 3 or whatever the highest yellow is, it can put you in torpedo range, ready for you to kind of take even as a standby order, launch back. And by the way, the Enterprise launches 2 torpedoes. So Jean-Luc Picard is incredibly effective if you keep his reactionary ability ready and keep him on board the captain's chair of a Galaxy-class ship, namely the Enterprise or any Galaxy-class ship. So he's extremely effective there. However, one of the workarounds that I used to have found is, okay, I'll fire at the Enterprise from a distance. I'll fire torpedoes from outside of range, because there's a certain range. You have to be within like comms range or something like that of the Enterprise in order for that to trigger. So I was under, before this came out, it was like, all right, the hostile act was firing the torpedo, which is still, again, you're taking combat action, so you're still doing a hostile act. But the torpedo's detonation itself, this is what's clarifying, that it's also a hostile act, and not one that you really can choose to ignore. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to force my torpedo not to detonate. Now, maybe they'll come out with special torpedoes that have smart controls that you can choose for them not to detonate at some point. Maybe that will be something that comes into the game at some point. It actually sounds like a really cool tech that I'd love to see show up. It might be beneficial, especially if you want to take some risky shots. However, if you were trying to fire at Picard from a distance, from outside of his range for him to react, that won't work with the torpedoes, because those torpedoes are going to still cause a hostile act and allow him to then bump up to yellow alert, and boom, and there you go. So now you know something about those torpedoes. I thought this was actually a fantastic FAQ. There's plenty more in here, and I think I touched on some of the biggest things that I found personally relevant from my games, but there's a whole lot of interesting stuff in here. Some misprints on the Star Drive card. Again, there wasn't that many misprints, but there were a few. Right down here for those maximum statuses on the Star Drive section. I will sadly admit to, in all of my games, I still have not had a saucer section separate. It's been close to happen, but it has not happened in any of my games yet, which I think is actually quite telling, because it doesn't happen in that many episodes of Next Generation either. It's kind of a niche case. Of course, every time I'm playing with the Enterprise, I'm separating and then reattaching, because it's the most fun thing in the world to do. But in the game, it's like you got to have just the right use case for it. And I haven't had that happen yet, although I've had some people tell me some interesting strategies about kind of splitting up and doing missions that way. I think that kind of works too. Again, if you want to kind of have more ships that can go to more places and attempt more missions and things like that, it's pretty cool. So that is my quick look at the FAQ. It looks pretty cool. Let me know what you think. I'm going to have a link to all of their documents down in the video description below. I will talk to you guys later. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Big thanks to my patrons. You guys are awesome and out of this world. And if you want to have your name in the credits and interesting and Patreon, there's links down in the video description below. Thank you so much. May the Force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. And always wash your socks.